Here's what the judge said. The court finds that Mr. Patel was not a credible witness. His testimony is not only illogical, but completely devoid of any evidence in the record. They don't happen with federal law enforcement agents, because when I was the U.S. attorney in Rhode Island, if one of my FBI agents had gone over into the United States District Court in Rhode Island and testified in a criminal case in such a way that one of the United States District judges said about that witness, we'd be looking into that. This comes darn close to being what is called giglio material that the government is forced to disclose to future defendants when it bears on the credibility of a government witness, an agent who is a government witness. Never before in the history of American law enforcement has somebody sought to attain a high position in American law enforcement who has pled the Fifth Amendment. Not only did he plead the Fifth Amendment, but he refused to tell the committee what it was all about. You can't plead the Fifth unless you have a reasonable expectation that could put you in jeopardy of a crime.
This is not a committee hearing. This is a Senate floor speech, which means Senator Whitehouse is making a formal statement for the permanent congressional record before the full Senate votes on whether to confirm Kash Patel as FBI Director. What makes this speech different from the partisan opposition you'd expect is the sourcing. The senator isn't citing Democratic opposition research. He is citing Kash Patel's own book, Kash Patel's own videos, Kash Patel's own podcast statements, and the documented assessments of senior Trump administration officials, John Bolton, Bill Barr, and CIA Director Gina Haspel, all of whom either refused to work with Patel or said publicly he was unqualified. And then there's the Fifth Amendment. No one seeking to lead a major American law enforcement agency has ever previously invoked their right against self-incrimination during the confirmation process. Patel did. He won't say what it was about. And the Senate is about to vote anyway. As a journalist covering federal institutions for 7 years, confirmation votes have consequences that outlast the political moment. This speech is Senator Whitehouse building the record so that when those consequences arrive, nobody can say they weren't warned. Let's go through it.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm here to join my distinguished colleague from California in opposition to the nomination of Kash Patel and to make crystal clear to this body what he is going to do in that job. He has shown who he is. So when these things go wrong, I want to be absolutely clear that our Republican friends were warned. They will own the consequences of Kash Patel's misbehavior. Let's start with the fact that unlike any FBI director before, this guy is a vitriolic partisan. And those are the stripes he shows when he is left to his own devices, and those are the characteristics he will revert back to when he is running the FBI. Just a few simple examples. This is from his book that contains, called Government Gangsters, and this is a page of his enemies list. Well, Attorney General Bondi said nobody should come to a law enforcement job with an enemies list. So then they had to pretend that this was not an enemies list. Well, of course it's an enemies list. Here's what Kash Patel himself says about it. Names named, roadmap unveiled, the manhunt starts tomorrow. If you're going to set up a manhunt against people, are they not your enemies by any logical definition of the term? He goes on to a video that shows himself chainsawing off the heads of the people on his enemies list, including the handsome junior senator from California and the daughter of former Vice President Cheney. It's a pretty gross image to be cutting the heads off of people with a saw, and he didn't put it up, but he retweeted it. He loved it so much that he put it up on his own media. Things like that are not appropriate for an FBI director. They're bizarre for just a normally weird person, but for an abnormally weird person to be the director of the FBI, things are going to go bad. Be warned.
Whitehouse opens with a framing that cuts through the confirmation hearing noise. Patel is a politician, not in a general sense, in a specific, documented sense. His book, Government Gangsters, contains a literal enemies list, pages of names of people he intends to pursue. Attorney General Bondi herself said nobody should come to a law enforcement job with an enemies list. Then the administration had to pretend the list wasn't what it was. Then the chainsaw video. Patel promoted and put on his own media a video depicting himself chainsawing off the heads of people on his enemies list. Senator, including Liz Cheney. The senator's assessment is precise and on the record. Things like that are bizarre for a normally weird person. For the director of the FBI, an institution that must appear before federal judges, build credible cases, and maintain the trust of 38,000 professional agents, they are disqualifying. The imagery isn't just inappropriate. It signals a disposition toward enemies that has nothing to do with law enforcement and everything to do with political combat.
A completely sycophantic suck-up when it comes to Donald Trump. He wrote children's books in which King Donald rules and his loyal little functionary, Kash, brings justice to him, pursuing the slugs of the FBI. When the FBI is asked to investigate corruption in Trump world, do you think Kash Patel will rise to the occasion, or do you think he'll participate in a cover-up? All you have to do is look at his own conduct and his own history. This is not Democrats saying this. What we're doing is relating what he has said and what he has done. This is Kash Patel on Kash Patel. He spread the really abhorrent lie that federal law enforcement was behind January 6th. On one of the many podcasts and interview shows where he spewed so much disinformation and partisan vitriol, he was asked, "Looks like you have a preponderance of evidence suggesting there may have been federal law enforcement involved in making January 6th happen." Patel's response, "I'll get you to beyond a reasonable doubt." Beyond a reasonable doubt, he believed and said federal law enforcement agencies were behind January 6th. We know that is preposterous. We know that is false. We know that investigations have shown that none of that is even remotely true. That is completely false information. And yet, here he is spouting it, and that's what he's going to look like as FBI director, too.
The senator documents 3 specific public statements that reveal how Patel thinks about the institutions he will now control. The senator's question is simple. When the FBI is asked to investigate corruption in Trump's world, will the man who wrote those books rise to the occasion or participate in a cover-up? Second, on a public podcast, Patel claimed he could prove beyond a reasonable doubt that federal law enforcement was behind January 6th. That claim is false. Multiple investigations have found no evidence of it. But Patel said it. Publicly. Repeatedly. And as FBI director, he will need to make cases before federal judges who will have heard him say it. Third, he called judges who ruled against Trump political terrorists and suggested impeaching any judge who ruled against the president. The senator's operational point is the one that matters most here. The FBI's entire function depends on convincing federal judges that its investigations are fair, its evidence is legitimate, and its agents are credible. Judges that its investigations are fair, its evidence is legitimate, and its agents are credible. A director who has called those same judges political terrorists has already poisoned that well before walking through the door.
The FBI is going to have to appear before judges and convince judges of the probity of the agency, of the legitimacy of the agency, of the propriety of the investigation, that the department has done a fair job of marshaling the evidence. Here's what he says about judges. We got to start impeaching judges if they've ruled against Donald Trump. They were a political terrorist, in his view. Any case that Donald Trump's been charged in, almost every judge is handling this thing as if they were not a judge, but a political terrorist. And of course, he meant the Trump judge down in Florida as the only one accepted. When you start talking about judges that way, you can't then expect judges not to pay attention when you come before them trying to do the work of the FBI. Then there's the question of what his former colleagues have said about him. These are things that he said himself. What have his former colleagues said about him? Every single one a Trump appointee. John Bolton, National Security Advisor. I didn't think he was qualified. I was forced to hire him. Political pressure jammed him into the job, and Bolton said, I don't want any part of this guy. I was forced to hire him. Attorney General Bill Barr. They tried to force him on Bill Barr as deputy director of the FBI. And he said Patel has virtually no experience that would qualify him to lead the FBI, and said, over my dead body does he get that job. These are the job recommendations of his own colleagues that show his unfitness. Over at the CIA, they tried to stuff him in someplace. And the director of the CIA, Gina Haspel, I'm no friend of Gina Haspel, but here's what she said about him. If he came over, she would resign before allowing Patel to assume a position as her deputy. This is a guy who has a record of engagement with Trump appointees that show that he is not qualified, not capable, and somebody that they would resign before they'd let work for them. And now we're supposed to let him work for the American people? It is ridiculous. He testified once in state court on a Trump-related case, and his testimony was, to put it mildly, not convincing.
This section is the most damaging in the speech because the sources are all Trump appointees. John Bolton didn't think Patel was qualified and said he was forced to hire him under political pressure. Bill Barr said Patel has virtually no experience that would qualify him to lead the FBI. CIA Director Gina Haspel said she would resign before allowing Patel to assume a position as her deputy. These are not Democratic opposition voices. These are the senior officials of the administration that Patel served in, people who worked alongside him, evaluated him, and concluded he was unfit. The senator's framing is direct. This is a guy whose record with Trump appointees shows that the people who know him best said, "Get this man out of here," before he causes damage. And now he's supposed to run the organization that every one of those people, and the American public, depends on to enforce the law without fear or favor.
Here's what the judge said. The court finds that Mr. Patel was not a credible witness. His testimony is not only illogical, but completely devoid of any evidence in the record. Okay, people come into court, they lie, the court doesn't believe their nonsense, and statements like this happen all the time in court. But here's where they don't happen. They don't happen with federal law enforcement agents. Because when I was the U.S. attorney in Rhode Island, if one of my FBI agents had gone over into the United States District Court in Rhode Island and testified in a criminal case in such a way that one of the United States District judges said about that witness, he was not a credible witness, his testimony was illogical, devoid of evidence in the record, we'd be looking into that. This comes darn close to being what is called giglio material, material that the government is forced to disclose to future defendants when it bears on the credibility of a government witness, an agent who is a government witness. People lose their careers over giglio material. This, if he was an FBI agent, would have caused a response in headquarters to say, what the hell is going on? How did one of our people get involved in such flagrantly fake testimony that he was called out by the judge in the case like this? And this is the person that they want to put in charge of the organization, whose probity and whose professionalism and whose integrity are essential to the successful working of the organization. And the guy was basically called out as a liar and a fraud in plain court. This guy is a hot mess. And when you have a character like this that lies in court, that runs chainsaw memes about your opponents, that every person who he tried to work with who was senior in the Trump administration said, get this bum out of here, I don't want to be anywhere near him, that's a record. And you all, my Republican friends who are going to vote on this guy, when he gets there and he does what his character tells us he will do, don't think this isn't going to come back to haunt you.
Attorney gives the argument its sharpest teeth. In a Trump-related state court case, Kash Patel testified. The judge's finding: Mr. Patel was not a credible witness. His testimony was not only illogical, but completely devoid of any evidence in the record. The senator explains what that finding means in operational terms. Attorney in Rhode Island: if one of his FBI agents received that kind of judicial finding, not a credible witness, illogical, devoid of evidence, that agent's career was effectively over. The finding becomes what lawyers call giglio material, a documented credibility problem that must be disclosed to defense attorneys in every future case that agent works. Patel is not being asked to be an FBI agent. He's being asked to be the director. But the institution's credibility before federal judges is determined by the credibility of the people representing it. A director who has already been called a liar in court and whose testimony a judge found illogical and devoid of evidence, arrives at that role with a credibility deficit that every defense attorney in America will know about and use. That role with a credibility deficit that every defense attorney in America will know about and use.
Don't think that his Trump servience as FBI director won't turn on you. Just because he's a vitriolic partisan who despises Democrats doesn't mean that when Trump's ire moves someplace else to Republican office holders, he won't be there to deliver the FBI as an enforcer against you. So there's a lot to be concerned about. I'll close with this. Never before in the history of American law enforcement has somebody sought to attain a high position in American law enforcement who has pled the Fifth Amendment. Not only did he plead the Fifth Amendment, but he refused to tell the committee what it was all about. You can't plead the Fifth unless you have a reasonable expectation that could put you in jeopardy of a crime. What crime? How in jeopardy? Explain that. You're not just a normal person. You're trying to be the head of the FBI. In a civil case, pleading the Fifth entitles the judge to instruct the jury to draw an adverse interest about your testimony, that the jury can find against you because you took the Fifth. Why we have not had a straight answer yet from our Republican colleagues about why the guy who wants to be the head of the FBI pled the Fifth? It is an unprecedented, terrible situation.
The senator closes with the argument that should have stopped the confirmation entirely and didn't. At some point during the confirmation process, Kash Patel invoked his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. He refused to tell the committee what the invocation was about. The Senate is voting to confirm him anyway. The senator's legal point is foundational. You cannot legally invoke the Fifth Amendment unless you have a reasonable belief that your answer could expose you to criminal liability. That's not a loophole or a technicality. It's a constitutional protection designed for exactly that situation. So the question is simple. What crime? In connection with what conduct? With what potential exposure? In a civil case, pleading the Fifth allows a judge to instruct the jury to draw an adverse inference, to find against you because you refuse to answer. That standard exists for ordinary civil defendants. It is being applied to nobody in this confirmation process despite being directly relevant. His closing warning to Republican colleagues is the most politically significant line of the speech. Don't assume that a vitriolically partisan FBI director who is loyal to Trump will only be used against Democrats. When Trump's anger shifts, and it always shifts, the same enforcement apparatus will be available against Republican office holders who fall out of favor. The FBI directorship is a 10-year term. Trump's friendships are not. My read as a journalist. This speech will be cited in one of two ways. If Patel's tenure is unremarkable, it will be forgotten as partisan opposition to a qualified director. If his tenure produces what Senator Whitehouse predicts, politicized investigations, judicial credibility problems, institutional damage, this speech becomes the document that proves the warnings were specific, documented, and ignored. The senator built that record deliberately. The vote happened anyway, and the consequences, whatever they are, now belong to everyone who cast it.